Hey, this is Scott from phasingplayer.com, and ever since I put up my learning how to play Pax Renaissance video, I've had a few people ask me for some strategy tips on the game, something a little more in-depth than just understanding the rules. Well, I understand why, right? Pax Renaissance is a pretty opaque game. Figuring out strategy is kind of hard. It's not the hardest game to learn how to play, but understanding the why can be pretty elusive. Now, personally, I think half the fun of most games is figuring out why you should be doing things in them. But even I was at a bit of a loss when I started playing Pax Renaissance. So I figured making a video to kind of give you a starting point when you're approaching the game makes sense. Now, just to be clear on some things, this is not comprehensive. This is not super deep, super, 100th game played strategy ideas. This is kind of for people new to the game or people that have played a handful of times and might want some idea on ways they can approach different pieces of the game. I do still think figuring out stuff like this on your own is great, so I'm not going to be giving you every bit of information. I want to leave stuff to figure out. But why don't we get started and start talking about some interesting starting ideas for Pax Renaissance. Okay, so one of the first areas you're going to run into trouble in Pax Renaissance is the very first turn you take in the game, especially if you're the first player overall. You can't base anything off of what other players have done. You don't have any context really for what you should be doing. You don't have a partner to dance with. You're leading the dance, right? And so all you really have to look at is the 10 cards in the market. The map hasn't changed, the other players don't have anything. You got to go off what came up in the market. But what do you look at for in the market? Like there's so much in the market, what do you look for? Personally, there are two things that I will always pay attention to in the market. First is if any religious prestige has shown up, and if there's more of one than any other. Let's say there's a whole bunch of Catholic prestige, or Christian prestige, I should say. If there's 3 of those, I will, note that. Either start picking it up myself, or start to pick up counters to those. Because if there's a lot of one religious prestige dominating, that might indicate that could be an attractive option for players, because one of the victory conditions has to do with having the most prestige of the dominant religion in the world. So religious prestige, in my experience, tends to get picked up pretty quickly, especially Islamic prestige in the East and Christian prestige in the West. Reformist is a little less powerful because having a reformist victory is hard. There are no reformists on the map to begin with. And so you need to flip a bunch of states and you need to add units in there. The reformist victory, the reformist holy victory, is it's an uphill battle for certain. That doesn't mean it's impossible to do, but it certainly is an uphill battle, especially compared to Islamic or Christian. Another type of prestige I'm going to look for is if there's any voyage prestige in the Western market. Now, in the base game, without the expansion, either the Board Game Geek expansion or the official expansion, I guess they're both official, but one's big and one's small. There is only 4 non-Empire voyage prestige in the Western deck, and there is none in the Eastern deck. So if any voyage prestige shows up in the Western deck, personally, I like to grab it no matter what. Just because there might not be any else. That might be it. There might not be any more voyage prestige beyond that one you've seen and the Portugal Empire, the Henry the Navigator. This is always in the game, so this will always be available. But it could be the only voyage prestige. And again, one of the victory conditions is having more voyage prestige, or discovery prestige. Is voyage even right? More of that prestige than anyone else. So I feel like if there's any of those cards, any of these cards in the Western market, I always try to pick them up because it might be the only opportunity to do so. An important thing to keep an eye out for as well in the market are going to be queens. Queens will allow you to pick up empire cards very quickly, and empire cards are super important to many facets of this game. Picking up a queen will give you some abilities, potentially. As you can see here, this queen will give you Inquisitor and repression of concessions. And once the queen is played, they will get to marry, or with the coronation one-shot, one king that is not yet in any player's tableau. The ones they get are listed on the card, so this queen in particular can pick up these three right here, while it changes from queen to queen. But queens are very good because it's a kind of effortless way to pick up empire cards that are still available in the empire stack. So empires are important because they are tied to a couple of the victory conditions of the game. The Renaissance victory wants you to have republics, which is one side of the empire card, and the Imperial victory wants you to have kings or republics. Doesn't matter which, they're both considered empire cards. Additionally, empire cards give you access to the campaign action, which is very strong in attaining the Imperial victory, which is to have empire cards, but it's also just good in general for kind of changing the board. They also give you concessions when you get them. Not only do they give you concessions when you attain them as a king, but they give you another concession if you're able to flip it over into a republic. And concessions are tied to one of the victory conditions. In addition, they are a great source of wealth. You need them to vote on top of that. Concessions are a very big part of this game for getting a wealth engine going, especially. If you can get the concessions all along a trade route, which is hard, don't get me wrong, but if you can get a bunch of concessions along a trade route and play that trade route, you will make bank, and it will give you a ton of flexibility in regards to the rest of the game. So that's something important to keep in mind. Again, queens can help get empire cards. It's not the only way, but it's an easy way. So speaking of empire cards, there's one in particular I really want to talk about, and that is Sultan Mehmed the Conqueror. He is the empire card tied to the Ottoman Empire, the Ottoman map card. Why do I want to talk about him in particular? Well, he's very strong. Let's take a look at the Ottomans for a moment. You can see here, the Ottoman card has Constantinople, Rhodes, and Modan as three locations. What's significant about this? Well, compared to every other card in the game, and I'm not going to show all of them, but compared to every other card, you'll notice these locations only have one unit in it. Well, Constantinople here has 3. What that allows, especially at the beginning here, with 2 knights, that allows for Mehmed to campaign all over the place. Constantinople is a force to be reckoned with in this game. If you can grab hold of Mehmed II, you can use that campaign action to quickly and easily take many cards surrounding him. If you are able to hold on to those, especially if you're the only person focusing on the East, you can really gain an Islamic dominance victory very fast. I've seen people pull it off within, 2 or 3 go-arounds. If they can grab him quick, campaign, flip some cards over with the right religious war, it's a pretty easy win at times, if it goes unchecked. And if it goes unchecked for too long, it can be hard to bounce back against it. So make sure you are paying attention to what the Ottomans are doing while you're playing this game. Fantastic. Well, you know that the Ottoman Empire card is super powerful. And guess what? A queen has come up in the market, and she can marry Mehmed the Conqueror. Cool. You can afford it. You're going to pick that up once it gets back. Geez. Look at that. Someone else bought that queen before you could, and they married Mehmed. Now you don't have the overpowered, unbalanced empire that everyone needs to win, right? What can you do about it? Sit down and take it? Just let Mehmed conquer the whole of Europe and win the game? Fortunately, there are a handful of cards that can deal with Mehmed without too much difficulty. Let's take a look at 2 in particular. Let's take a look at the Grim and Gem Anti-Hostage. So these 2 cards are especially good at dealing with someone like Mehmed. They're both based in the Ottoman Empire, as you can see, and in addition to that, they have similar abilities. Let's take a look at Siege. The Siege ability lets you straight up kill a unit in the location of the card. In this case, it's the Ottoman Empire. So while Mehmed is trying to build up forces to go campaigning, Jem or the Grim can just kill those units as they come up. No problem, right? They just kill them, and Mehmed has to keep working his way up to build a force to campaign. Without that force, he can't campaign, he loses a lot of his strength. Well, what if he has stuff to put more units in with one action and then march with another tableau maneuver? You can't really interrupt that with a siege, so you have to plan those in advance. Well, fortunately, both these cards also have the terrifying and powerful Behead ability. Now, there's a lot of stuff you can behead that doesn't take too much of a toll on you, but it is really tempting to just behead Empire cards. And both these guys can do that. However, remember, if you behead an Empire card, then you have to discard this card to do so. They get caught, I guess, by royal guards and are sent to the guillotine themselves. But they do take out that Empire. And that's especially damaging if Mehmed has been conquering all around Europe, because he'll have a bunch of vassals underneath him. You cut off the head, that player loses those vassals as well. So while Mehmed is powerful, and this goes to every Empire card, there are many of them that can be beheaded. Remember that they are not invincible. While they're powerful, they're not invincible. So if someone like Mehmed ends up working against you, keep an eye out for people like Jem Anti-Hostage and the Grim, because that'll make your day a whole lot nicer. Okay, something else that you should keep in mind is having a flexible tableau. I'm going to use that word flexible frequently because it's a key to Pax Renaissance. Having a flexible tableau is vital. Now, when I say flexible, I don't mean a bunch of different action types in your Western tableau, though that is good. I mean being able to pivot between the West and the East. Don't just get tunnel vision and focus only on one side of the tableau. Let's say you do and you focus on the West, and then another player starts dominating the East and they are working their way towards one or multiple potential victory conditions. How do you stop them if you don't have any actions available to you in the East? Yeah, you could buy cards and play them into your tableau and start to expand your East tableau a little bit. I keep saying tableau a lot. It's turning into one of those words that you say a lot and it starts to sound funny. But that's a bad way to go about it. Responding to something from nothing is a good way to lose a lot of ground in Pax Renaissance. If you split your tableau sides to, 70% East, let's say, and 30% West, that'll give you the ability to pivot toward the West or toward the East as needed. And you're not starting from zero if you need to switch sides and respond to something going on. Something to consider that I overlook a lot and in retrospect feel like I should do more, and so I'm going to say it now in hopes that you will be able to remember it and that'll also help me remember it, saying it out loud, is selling cards from your tableau or your hand is good. Don't feel like you're necessarily wasting an action by having bought a card, held it for a bit, and then realized, I don't need this, and I sold it off. Selling cards is great. Taking a look at, again, we mentioned him before, but Jem Anti-Hostage. He has the red text ability here that lets you sell him for 4 florins instead of 2. Don't ignore that. Sometimes it can be nice just to get him out, maybe behead some non-Empire card, do a siege or 2, and then you realize you don't really need him anymore. So sell him for 4 florins. 4 florins can be game-changing. Money can be a little bit hard to come across in this game. If you're able to place a ton of concessions on the board and get florins from that, that's great, but not every player is going to be able to saturate trade routes with concessions. So selling cards for 2 or 4 florins, depending on the card, is very strong. So don't neglect selling. Selling is good. When it comes to winning the game, all 4 victory conditions are important to keep in mind. Not that you will always be able to position yourself to complete all 4. In fact, you'll never be able to do that. But it is important to know what other players are gunning for. If someone is collecting a whole bunch of voyage prestige, keep an eye on their concessions, and vice versa as well. If they're placing a bunch of concessions and no voyage prestige has come up in the Western market, don't let them hang on to that Portugal Empire card, because that could be the only prestige of that type in the game. Further, with the Holy Victory, pay attention to what religious prestige is coming up. If there are a whole lot of reformist cards coming out, and you see one reformist bishop, keep an eye on that bishop, because remember, for any religion to be dominant, a bishop needs to be in play. So keep an eye out for things like that. For Renaissance and Imperial victories, which has to do with empire cards flow pretty freely throughout the game, in my experience. So make sure you're paying attention and doing counts to see who has what and who can get what. If you can figure out what someone wants to do before they do it, that'll put you in a great spot for every victory condition in the game, both to attain it and defend it. Additionally, when it comes to victory cards, don't pigeonhole yourself into one. Don't only focus on trying to make a reformist dominant world happen and thus take the Holy Victory via Reformation. If you only keep your eyes on one of the 4 potential wins, you won't do well, unless your opponents are doing the same thing as well. You need to make sure that you are, and I've said this a handful of times already, but a key to this game is being flexible, being able to adapt to the situations that come up and the problems that present themselves. If you have little solutions to a lot of the things going on, you'll find yourself in a great position. When it comes to comets, these things coming out are like lighting a fuse on a bomb. They are scary, to say the least. Even if you're in a position where you think, when a comet comes up, I'm going to qualify for this victory condition, so I'll buy it. Oftentimes, you'll end up in a spot where you can purchase the card, but you can't quite do the victory. So you figure, I'll buy this card, activate a condition, and then when it comes back around to me, I'll claim victory and win. But that never happens. Usually is not even the right word. In my experience, it's been every time. When a comet card gets purchased, everybody changes what they're doing. Everyone will shift. The mood at the table changes. The types of actions people are taking will switch. And it's like a timer is suddenly put on the game. Maybe you were the only person with Republics when you purchased that card, purchased the Comet card. Well, by the time it gets back to you, either don't expect to have those Republics anymore or expect several other players to have picked up Republics or Discovery Prestige. Comets are dangerous. So when one comes out, don't feel like you have to use it necessarily immediately. Let it sit in there for a moment, or use it to deny another player that's doing really well. If you look at the table around you and you see the player that's going to be going after you has enough Empire cards to win, they have 2 more than anyone else, it can be totally legitimate to buy that Comet card and flip over the Holy Victory instead. That prevents them from taking it themselves and claiming victory, and it can sort of diffuse a situation a little bit that maybe other people didn't immediately see coming. So Comets are game-changing when they come out. Just make sure the game is changing in a way that benefits you. The victory condition you will probably see in your first few games is going to be the Imperial victory. All you need to do it, all you need, is 2 Empire cards, 2 Empire cards more than another player in the game. So if I have 3 Empire cards and each other player has 0 or 1, I qualify. Because of that, because it's easy to meet that goal, you end up seeing this a lot. However, it is, in many cases, an early game victory. As the game goes on, it will become harder to attain because people will have more tableau actions to deal with empires getting moved around or taken quickly. One of those things is the trade fair action. As the trade fair action gets taken, which it'll start to get taken more as people get concessions put down onto the map, more levies will get placed onto the map cards, which makes the campaign action harder to do because there's going to be more stuff you have to kill in order to take successfully a region and thus an empire card into your tableau. So the Imperial victory is sort of like weathering a storm. If you can hang on and stop that from sort of dominating the game, you can worry a little bit less about it. Okay, well, there are a few tips for getting into Pax Renaissance and some stuff to consider. Again, this is not comprehensive. This is not every piece of strategy or information that one can give about this game. I am by no means a master of Pax Renaissance. It's a complex game. It's also very dependent on the people you're playing with, the types of cards that come out, the types of cards that even made it into the East and West decks. Remember, the decks that you end up playing with are only going to be a small fraction of the potential cards. In theory, it's possible there are very few queens in a given deck, which will make taking empires more difficult. It's also possible that all of the potential voyage or discovery prestige, again, I forget the term off the top of my head, it's the prestige with the sailboat in it. It's possible that all 4 of those from the Western deck are in there. It's possible none are. That's kind of a cool thing about this game, is what is viable from game to game will change depending on the composition of the market decks. But if you can keep in mind a few of these tips that I passed your way, hopefully you will be able to figure out some strategies of your own and be flexible and be able to think on your toes enough to claim victory. So thanks for watching this. If you enjoyed it, check out my website at phasingplayer.com. I've got every video I make I put up there, as well as things that I write and some audio stuff that I record that I put up there for people to check out. So good luck playing Pax Renaissance, and I hope that you are able to become the Pope, or at least burn some heretics.